The Giga Coaster. I would love one of these at my home park. Heck, all of you would want one at your home park. Unless you live close to Cedar Point. And in that case, oh, aren't you spoiled? And I envy you. The Giga Coaster is a very rare model. Currently, only 7 of them are in operation. Very few rides crack the 300-foot barrier, but stay below 400 feet. The last one was about 4 years ago in 2020 with Orion at Kings Island, but after that, nothing. It feels like I gotta pop the question, are parks done with Giga Coasters? Are parks finished building them? Has the market been completely saturated? Will we see any more in the future? That's very tough to say, but you know what? I'm gonna remain just a little optimistic. I'm predicting that we will see a Giga sometime in the next 3 to 4 years. Yes, very close in the future. And the main reason I'm saying this is because of one factor: expansion. Let me try to explain. So, the Giga Coaster, as most of you know, began in 2000, when Cedar Point opened Millennium Force. That was, debatably, the first roller coaster to break the 300-foot barrier. And that's when Cedar Point coined the word Giga. Even though technically, by conversion standards, it should have been called a hecto coaster. The prefix Giga is kind of reaching, just a tad. But after Millennium Force, the Giga Coaster kind of remained dormant for a little bit. That wasn't until 2010 when they built I-305 at King's Dominion, another Giga from the same manufacturer, Intamin. However, this one was a lot different than Millennium Force. It focused more on intensity, and specifically low-to-the-ground transitions. Millennium Force, when that debuted, most of the elements were more higher up off the ground. I-305, on the other hand, remained more low to the ground. It had one massive airtime hill after the first turn, but it prioritized speed and rapid-fire transitions very close to the ground. But after I-305, Canada's Wonderland, they took their stab at a Giga, this time going with a different manufacturer. B&M. This was the manufacturer's tallest roller coaster at the time. Leviathan, at a nice height of 306 feet, just 1 foot taller than I-305. This coaster took a very different approach. Instead of having low-to-the-ground transitions, each element would be at a higher altitude, so you couldn't really feel the speed. It kind of felt like an upscale hyper coaster from the same company. But every problem with Leviathan would be fixed with Fury 325 in 2015, which is debatably the best Giga Coaster. Fury is way different compared to Leviathan. It feels more like I-305, but if they toned it down just a bit, keeping the same principle at remaining low to the ground, with rapid-fire transitions and some quick airtime hills in succession to give you some ejector. But after Fury was completed in 2015, 5 years later, we got Orion, which is basically just like Leviathan. Maybe just a little bit better, but not by a wide margin. But that's about it for Giga Coasters. Yes, there are a few stragglers out there. We got Steel Dragon 2000 in Japan, and we got Red Force over in Ferrari Land. But I'm not focusing on those Gigas. The main reason I pulled these ones were because they all have something in common. They're all from Cedar Fair. Cedar Fair was the main buyer of the Giga model. No other chain buys Giga Coasters in bulk like this company. They made it a priority to install a Giga at every one of their major parks. And the only reason they stopped was because they kind of ran out of room to expand. Cedar Fair at the time only had 11 parks, and only a select few of them were actually considered a destination, a park that was outside a major metropolis or population center and can draw in a large crowd. The only upper echelon park they couldn't expand into was Knott's Berry Farm, and they tried to put a Giga there. You may recall from a few years ago, there were some rumors and sketches going around for a 350-foot tall coaster going to Knott's Berry Farm, and it seemed very plausible that it could have happened. That was until the city shut it down, and Cedar Fair tried proposing a hypercoaster instead of a Giga, and that didn't go anywhere, so the entire proposal just kind of died out. And that meant that Cedar Fair, they basically had no parks left that were worthy enough to receive a Giga coaster. You can argue that Dorney was a worthy contender, but come on, Cedar Fair doesn't really treat that park that well. But once Knott's Berry Farm was rejected, that seemed to be the end for the Giga. No other chains had any interest or the capital to invest, so that should be it. Case closed. Until July 2024 happened, when Cedar Fair and Six Flags merged with one another, making Cedar Fair and Six Flags a much larger company with a wider collection of properties. And since Cedar Fair, they are the majority shareholder of the new Six Flags Corporation, could it be safe to say that the Giga Coaster can make a resurgence? It's certainly a possibility. When Cedar Fair acquired Paramount Parks back in 2006, they knew how to beef up those properties. They made sure to invest heavily in that new division of the company. The best proof for this was when they first installed Behemoth back in 2008 at Canada's Wonderland, a large-scale hypercoaster. And then in 2009, they built another hypercoaster at Kings Island with Diamondback, and then another with Intimidator at Carowinds in 2010. Cedar Fair, they were very persistent in investing in their new properties, even though they had just acquired all these parks 2 years prior and were probably feeling a little debt. Cedar Fair, they have always had a reliable investment strategy on focusing on quality over quantity, building a large-scale roller coaster at each of their flagship parks as a way to entice the public and to give the park a hook. A reason for why people would travel across the country or even across the state just so they can experience one ride. Hypercoasters, Giga coasters, whatever the premier roller coaster is at a certain park, that's their anchor, the main reason why people visit. So if the new Six Flags Corporation does decide to go down this path of focusing on quality, who's to say they will even go down the Giga route? And yeah, that is a fair question. Giga coasters do have a few contingencies if you build them. For one, you have to allocate a lot of land. It's hard to build them compact. But one of the biggest reasons why no other chain built Gigas besides Cedar Fair was the price tag. When you think of a roller coaster over 300 feet, you have to imagine it probably cost a pretty penny. So would it be plausible to say that Six Flags would be willing to invest a lot of capital into one singular ride at one park at a time? Well, if they're going to do the Cedar Fair method, it could be a fair assessment, but there's one more reason why I think Giga coasters might start popping up again, and that has to do again with money. I already said Giga coasters are expensive, I'm not denying that, but they're not as expensive as you might think. If I were to tell you that a ride like Diamondback was the exact same price as a ride like Orion, would you believe me? If you don't believe me, then you're sorely mistaken. Because believe it or not, the cost of a hypercoaster like Diamondback and the cost of a Giga like Orion aren't that far in price. I know it sounds crazy, but let me show you. So, Diamondback opened in 2009 at a price tag of $22 million. Orion opened in 2020 with a price tag of $30 million. I know it's an $8 million deviation, but I have to adjust the time value of money to make it correct. The spending power of $22 million in 2009 is not going to be the same as money in 2020. So if I adjust the $22 million in 2009 money to 2020 money, I get a new price tag of $26.5 million. Meaning that the difference in price for Orion and Diamondback is only around 11%. And remember, Orion's a slightly longer and taller ride than Diamondback, so the additional cost of steel is gonna inflate the price. And guess what? It's not just Diamondback and Orion where I can make this comparison. If I compare Behemoth and Leviathan together, it's the exact same phenomenon. Behemoth cost $26 million in 2008. If I move it to 2012 money when Leviathan was built, it's $27.7 million. To put in perspective, Leviathan was $28 million. And both of these rides have around the exact same track length. Behemoth is 5,300 feet, and Leviathan is almost 5,500 feet. But the fact they're almost identical in price is insane. Why is this the case? Gigas are fundamentally taller rides, so shouldn't they cost more? Well, no. Not if the manufacturer is smart. B&M in particular, they have really mastered the technique of building structures for roller coasters. Let me just show you a comparison of Behemoth's lift hill and Leviathan's lift hill. Do you see any difference? Well, Leviathan, it uses significantly less supports. B&M, they have been able to improve the static structure of Leviathan to use less material and rely more on a truss structure. That way, they can reduce the cost of production and make it nearly the same cost as a ride they built 4 years ago, while also making sure it's a longer ride. Roller coaster companies in the last 15 years, they've been improving on their craft, making rides more cost-effective in terms of labor, materials, and design, while also giving you more than if you just paid a few years prior. So even if the cost of steel has been going up exponentially year over year, it's not really gonna matter. Companies like B&M or Intamin, they're going to be more efficient in their construction in an effort to bring down the cost of the final product despite the higher cost of steel. This is just how the free market works. Companies are profit-driven, so if there's a way for them to build the ride cheaper, they will, and they have. People may say Giga coasters are getting more expensive, that's why no parks are buying. That's not really true. They are almost no different from the cost of a hypercoaster. At this point, it really just comes down to track length, not height. And Six Flags, they start buying Gigas in the next, I want to say, 3 to 4 years, because that's around the same time Cedar Fair started investing in higher thrill attractions when they bought the Paramount Parks. Then the cost of a 300-foot coaster will only get cheaper, because let's say other companies besides B&M want to sell a Giga to Six Flags. That means they'll try to offer a cheaper alternative, maybe have a different approach to building these coasters, maybe see something better from Intamin, or maybe Mock Rides. I want to say Rocky Mountain Construction. I thought they would be the lead runner in this category by now, but that T-Rex model, that never happened, and they have no interest in building the T-Rex model anytime soon. But if RMC ever did try to do that, then there would be a new category of cheap 300 plus tall coasters. Or maybe Intamin will get around to it first, who knows. So are 300 foot tall coasters dead? No. Companies will find ways to make taller rides cheaper, and if someone's willing to buy, it will happen. Cedar Fair was persistent with Knott's Berry Farm before that went to shit. So maybe with their new expansion, it could happen at maybe Great Adventure or Magic Mountain or Great America. Who knows? At this point, it's just the waiting game. We have to see if Cedar Fair, now Six Flags, wants to continue this strategy, or if they will move in a completely different direction. We'll just have to wait a few years to find out.